So again, this is something that Forest River and Cardinal should have done when they built it. Now, I did not really cover it when I talked about doing all these screws and all the trim work. The screws are actually grabbing onto the trim too. So before I was just putting a bigger screw in, I did need to drill it out at about 3/16, just so that the screws won't bite onto the aluminum. We want it to bite on behind and then squeeze the track against the wall. And now, while some people might say I should have sealed that hole, there's still putty behind this, and that still is going to get squished now. In fact, over time it's going to ooze out. And if I come over to the other side, that's already been done, you can see how it's expanded out right there too. So I haven't trimmed all this off yet because it'll probably still ooze a little bit more. And then after that, that's when I'll come back and cut it all off. However, to make sure you're only going through the trim, if you go into the wall, you stripped out the hole and now these screws won't grab onto anything. But don't feel too bad, because I've done that too. And worst case scenario, you fill in the hole and then drill another one, I don't know, a little bit below. You know, hide your mistakes. Yeah, this stuff was definitely at the end of its life. I'm always really baffled by why we're still using this stuff. When it comes to the molding right here, again, I think Cardinal and Forest River used the wrong stuff. We should not have vinyl track, because water will get in here and then this just becomes a channel to run it up into all there. My other issue is that I don't want to replace all of this, so I'm coming up with a different workaround on this, and I'm not putting this back on. It's not the best workaround, but you can see I've left this vinyl insert off right here. Now, I won't deny that water could get trapped into here and work its way back up again inside the trailer, but I do have something I'm going to do on that. Bad design is bad design. We'll figure this out on the way. This should have just been either flat stock or they should have, I don't know. There's a lot of different things they should have done, but they didn't. However, if we look up here on the roof, I have added the dreaded Turnabond as flashing over the top to help control water. That's what most modern manufacturers do too, and it does work out. Now, I know a lot of you will say, hey, I thought you hate a Turnabond, and I do hate a Turnabond, but the design of the slide out room is what it is. I can't redesign it without building 3 new slide out rooms, and I'm not going to do that. But this is flashing tape, and that's its main purpose. It's not lap seal, where I hate its application as a lap sealant. As flashing, form in place flashing, this is its job. The thing I don't like about it is that it has to go past this rubber flap, and that will grab the edge over time, and that butyl sealant will ooze out and get stuck to the seal. So compromises are compromises. I'm just keeping you guys abreast of what I'm actually doing. So we will be pulling this out. It's just kind of like put behind the fascia when they built it. So that was just a gutter straight inside. And of course these screws will also be changed out. These are a different screw. Still, they used short ones. But I will be making them a lot longer, even though that should be good. On the side molding right here, we'll be changing out all these molding, or all these screws too. We want to make sure we're actually grabbing onto stuff. So, all the way up there, across the top. And we'll be doing the same thing on the slide out fascia here, because when they do build them, there is framing on the corners, almost nothing in the middle. But yeah, I shouldn't complain so much because this is 2009, and I mean, I guess it is solid. But if this was probably in Florida or Alabama, out all the time, it would have been rotten and we would have just been destroying it and cutting it down for scrap. And I can't think of a good reason not to have the edge screwed down. Otherwise, it was likely just to speed along production. Ideally, this will get cleaned off. We'll add some sealant on top of it. We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I can't rebuild the entire trailer. Now, it could very well be argued that I didn't need to change out these screws. They were definitely long enough to just barely grab on. But we're doing this anyways. We might as well do all of it. The next big step after all of this is going to be underneath right here. We can see that this flap has come loose because these screws are not pinching this rail down tight underneath. So we take a look at these screws that are holding on the lower sill here. I think they're even shorter, but you can see the framing that it's going into right there. So there are actually 2 rubber seals this has to go through. So this will help out quite a bit. And of course, if you guys have noticed, there's blowout damage here. Now, no real damage to the structure, but obviously we don't want this exposed to water and splashing. And while we could just get new material like this, you can find this pretty easily at the hardware store because it's kind of just the exact same stuff as landscaping fabric. And we could staple it right here, not a problem. It's going to be getting it underneath that's going to be the bigger problem. So I have found more work I need to do. Okay, well that wasn't doing anything. That's why we're doing this, right? Now say what we want about Cardinal's bad design or build quality right here. I will point out this is a 2009, and so the frame is actually a heck of a lot thicker than modern frames on thick those are. We don't have any sort of frame flex we have to worry about with this one, so that's a nice one to have. And then underneath they were still doing their corrugated steel instead of being corrugated plastic that it is today. So this is still kind of impressive, unless you have to take it down and then you cut yourself. All right, for me to move on with this seal, the lower wiper seal, I need to get out from underneath this again. This is a level out floor, so it's gonna be very difficult for me to feed this back in and behind all there with all the weight of the slide out room above it. Now, because these are hydraulically driven slide out rooms, and Cardinal did help us out quite a bit, I don't have to operate all 3 of them at the same time. I can turn off the one I don't want to operate, or the 2 I don't want. So I'm going to turn off the bed and the opposing and turn the main on. It's a nice feature. Not all manufacturers give you that when it comes to hydraulic slide out rooms. Slide out room, we'll just bring it in a little bit, bring it up right about there. So now we should be up off the floor down below. All right. So I did like having it out because it gave me a lot more room to work on underneath. But yeah, see, now I can get my hand underneath there. So now I just take these loose and put the seal back in place. You can see it was really close to the edge and it got ripped out because it wasn't pinching very tight because the screws weren't grabbing, or they're broken, or both. So now I'm gonna have to take all these screws out to give enough slack on this molding so that I can put the seal back on correctly. So we can see there's just a bent or a 90-degree flap right here. It goes behind the molding. And then this is just a flap that goes behind all of that and gets tucked in behind. Again, not the most elegant of designs, but you'll find that a lot of manufacturers don't have the most elegant design, and engineering is not something that any of them do, no matter what they say. I'm not an engineer. I've built a few trailers, and this is basically how I would have built it too, with off-the-shelf parts, and said maybe it'll work, and then if it doesn't, we'll adjust in the future. So hopefully now you guys can see this trim is just squishing or sandwiching this piece of a rubber flap and the other piece of rubber flap against this piece of steel down there. And the most ironic thing about all of it is I don't even think this is that important, because this is a level out floor. Probably doesn't even do anything. But we'll put it back on. Maybe when it's closed up, that's about the only time it does anything, because this will have to fill the gap against here, driving down the road. But when it's in its out position, the floor is going to be sitting right down on top of this. I don't even think any light could ever get through except for at the corners. And they're still going to get through at the corners. No manufacturers figured that one out either, unless you have an air seal like a motor coach. Now, one of the problems of using two shorter screws is that, well, we could see that the screws went through the rubber flap and tore it. The screws themselves can't hold that rubber seal on. It's just going to pull through like we saw it. This trim needs to be able to clamp and hold it and pinch it together. And so the screws were too short. They didn't grab on enough to grab, because there's a lip to this rail right here. That's going to be about 1/4 inch, and the two rubber flaps. And then the tip of the screw is self-tapping, so it doesn't have any threads on it. So almost no threads are actually going to be going past that hole to grab on. Okay, and with that, we have now resecured the seal down here. Oh, I need this. Alright, now that I don't need room underneath there, I can retract the slide out room. Makes doing all the other screws a lot easier. I don't want it all the way in, because I will need to access all the screws on the top too. Which hopefully you can see right here, and you also see why I want to add that turn-on flashing over here to kind of protect this edge right there. It's, again, pretty bad design. Yeah, really bad design. Picture frames on slide-out rooms is as bad as lazy as building an RV slide-out room could be. And they're still doing it in 2025 on luxury RVs and motor coaches too. Now I should be able to easily replace and upgrade all the screws and this old vinyl insert all the way around. Forget about these inside ones. See, that's why you don't want the screws to grab onto this. They break, which is a little bit frustrating. And one thing I did forget to point out to you guys is that I don't think the spacing of these screws is going to be good enough when we come along to the top. I didn't point it out. The top is designed to hit first, and then the bottom sucks in. So there's going to be a lot more stress at the top, causing that fascia to bend and allow water in. So we'll be drilling in more screws at or holes in the top too. While on the side, I don't think we need to add any more holes. You know, less holes the better. Up on top, we're going to be putting the flashing across with the turn-on. So get this done. Yeah, like I said, you're just going to have water getting in there either way. So why have it in there? At least with it out, if we wanted to, we could probably just cut a drain hole at the bottom of this on either side. That way if water did get in, it didn't travel back inside. Then just like we did on the other slide out, we're going to add another screw right about here. So I'll just drill a hole. Yeah, that'd be a lot better. And of course, with all these old screws, honestly not bad screws, I do put them somewhere so that you're not leaving them on the ground for the tires to run over them. Really, how you can critique anything about Cardinal again and Forest River. And when I put my corner block on, I went ahead and I sealed this up pretty well so that water wouldn't get behind here. They decided that the cap seal on top was going to be more than enough, and of course missed most of the cap seal, so water could get right back here too. This is why it's important to build it correctly. I mean, almost all the competition builds it the exact same way. And it is just assembly. Why not just take a couple more minutes to do it correctly? Now again, I'll just be doing the exact same thing we did down below, placing these screws. And while again, I don't like a Turnabond, probably should have put a Turnabond on top right here when they built it, rather than just a little bit of, I don't even know if you call that non-sagging die core, but we're gonna cap it off over here, and if we add too much of it, it starts getting a little bit complicated. It starts to gum this area up. So we're gonna work with what we can. We want to have an outlet over here for water to get out. And again, we're gonna leave this part off, and just like on the side here, we're gonna take the screws out, drill a hole, and then on this, like I said, I'm going to add a hole in between each one of those to add another screw in there, because you can see it's a pretty good gap right in here. So I want to keep this from flexing too much. And you might notice that hole right there, there's a screw broken off in there. It's no big deal because the Turnabond's going to come over a side right there, right about to here. And then I still have to cut this area out a little bit so I can make this a little bit more of a rounder edge so that the Turnabond doesn't get torn by the aluminum underneath it. Again, factories don't take time to do that either. All you really need is a hammer, that's it. But I'll trim it a little bit so it hammers down easier. And again, I do try to make this point quite a bit about the design of these slide outs. There are at least one or two luxury diesel pusher manufacturers that basically build their slide out rooms the exact same way for charging $1.5 million on it. Still have a rubber roof, molding on the side, picture frame fascia on the outside, and kind of bad wiper seals too. So maybe this is acceptable for a 2009 fifth wheel. I'm doing my best to shame the manufacturers into building better slide out rooms, especially if they're going to be charging $1.5 million for a brand new RV. And again, it's really not fair. My biggest critique is just this wasn't built or assembled correctly. I'm an RV technician. I'm just supposed to do repairs and not structural rebuilds. You know, it's supposed to be at least have built well. I shouldn't have to redesign or rebuild a house because the house wasn't built right at the beginning. And unlike the residential home market, where you at least will have some inspectors giving some input as it's being built, all you have are workers at the factory who really don't have a great incentive to tell their co-workers that they did something wrong, and they all have to share the same lunchroom space together, or be told they're going to be working for free because their buddy said that they didn't do it correctly. So if the inspector and the worker have the same incentive for the production to be met in order to get a bonus or not having to work on a Friday, I don't know, it seems like conflicts of interest if you're inspecting work for the company that's building the RV. Now, all that being said, the workers do their best. I don't imagine I'm ever shaming any of the actual manufacturers, because the modern manufacturers are not construction workers, they're not makers, they're not the original families that started all these companies. They're all finance bros. So whether or not their RVs are built well, it doesn't really matter that much to them. They understand that the modern RV buyer only holds on to an RV about 3 to 5 years, and then they move on. So after 3 or 5 years, they're no longer the manufacturer's customer. But more importantly, they aren't building RVs, even though I know they are building something material that looks like an RV. They are basically mining Bitcoin and making a commodity. Once the RV is built, it will get assigned a VIN number, and that VIN number can then be bought by a bank and loaned against. So at least they're making a tangible commodity and not just a, cyber commodity. But that's what really drives manufacturers. And I'm convinced that's why we have the modern RV problem we have today, because those people have been in charge for over 20 years now. Their customer base does not have an institutional memory. So every 3 to 5 years, you get new people that are moving in, new people that are moving out, and they don't know all the problems that the previous generation had, even if they are watching all these videos. So there's really no great incentive for the manufacturers to build a better product. It just needs to make it the first year and make sure that the banks will loan against the VIN number. That's about it. So that's just my outsider's perspective on why everything is built so poorly. Also, you have a complete consolidation of the industry from supplier and builder, and it all exists in one major region, and so you can't rely on that region stepping in to make any sort of legal enforcement on it. So currently, from my point of view, the manufacturers are just in a treading water stage of doing just enough to prove that they are listening to their consumer base, or making new companies that will listen to their consumer base for about 3 or 5 years, ironically. But not necessarily building a good product, because there's no real money in that. All right, so with that rant a little bit out of the way, the next step is now going to be to do this top of the fascia here. Now on this seal that they used, I can just get it out of the way. Again, this is an older method of building a slide out, but it just has a, come back here, crimped seal with a bulb seal attached to it, and this is just foam, or rubber foam. So now we can get really good access to these screws right here. Kind of excited because this is the last slide out room I have to do this to. It's also the biggest one. I think I'm also over halfway done with this box of 500 screws. Now I did pick this up from my buddy Craig there in Mesa. He runs a parts store, RV Parts Plus. Really brilliant. He stocks stuff like this that you actually need when working on RVs. You can be surprised how difficult it is just to find the right screws. So that's in Mesa. I'll put a link in the description down below, but RV Parts Plus, really great company. Now, because I'm going to be redesigning this roof, I'll take out all the screws first. Okay, and this is a rubber roof membrane, and I have no desire to replace this rubber roof on slide out rooms on travel trailers and fifth wheels or any RV, because it's quite a big job to replace a rubber roof membrane on a slide out room. So we're going to do our best to prolong the life of this roof quite a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a couple broken ones, but this is what's actually keeping it from flexing when it hits against the wall right here. And if this flexes, then it opens up, and that's where water gets in and causes all sorts of problems. Again, very bad design. And there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws trying to hold this fascia from bending out. Yeah, I know there's a lot on the front, but that will still allow it to pivot. Yeah, bad design. If this doesn't work, I might have to get a jack and support and lift up the bottom of the slide out too.